Thank you. Uh, there's so many things that I'd like to say, but I assure you I won't take up all the space. I think people are dying to talk to you about the film. But thank you also for thanks Vikalp Bengaluru for bringing this film to Bangalore and for inviting me to have this conversation with Vani. Mm, you probably already know this, but Bangalore is cinema crazy. So it's great fun to have this film in this city where a whole area is named after one cinema theater, Majestic. And all those single screens, now we're calling them single screens because now there's an alternative. But most of them have come down. So many, many things in this film relate to, I think, all our lives, people in the audience, and especially those of us who've grown up going to the films. So I just want to start off by saying, first of all, thank you. It's a cinematic eulogy, and really wonderful to watch. It also is saying many things. It's about the passion of people who start these spaces, screening spaces, because it's not only about money. There's a deep passion, love. It's a history of India's kind of cities and the cultural landscape of cities across India. And it's also about, of course, the place of cinema in people's lives, not just as entertainment, it's also about politics in cinema. And there's a huge, there's a whole other narrative playing out in the kinds of songs you've chosen, the dialogues you have chosen from films. So there's a whole other story happening there. I just want to ask that there are two questions. One is your own body of work is really diverse. You've made a film on Ayodhya, you've made film on the death penalty, the food, so many things. Could you say why and how you came into this particular story? And second, there's so many, it covers such a large canvas. Did you have to struggle to make a choice?
Hi everyone, and thanks for coming. Thanks for staying for the discussion. Thanks Vikalp and BIC. This is delightful for me to be here in Bangalore. And actually, sorry, I haven't learned to say its new name. I have to still call it Bangalore. I know. I've got some internal resistance to this. It took me, I think, just a couple of decades to start calling it Pune. So I'll get there, you know. So I think, no, thanks a lot for coming. And it's always a joy to share work that one has made and sweated and, and drop blood over. But I think it's lovely when you're able to then start a dialogue with it, okay? Your first question is, you said two questions, making it sound simple, but of course both of them open up like cans of worms in life. But I think that the sort of short answer to your first question about why, I mean, my films are across many diverse so-called issues or concerns or topics or whatever. But for me, I feel they do have a connective kind of tissue in the sense that, because I've often wondered about it, because my own brain then goes from one thing to something else. And then it starts obsessing and starts whizzing around something else. And then it takes time for it to ferment and become a nice pickle. And then I have to start working on it and, start eating it. So I was just telling a friend here that, I've got a seed of an idea somewhere, but it's not even, right now, I can't even grasp it for what might be my next work, So I think these things are, but for me, the connective tissue is really the political that ties them. So if I was looking at Ayodhya, it was looking not at the big leaders. That's for me, the easy narrative and the obvious narrative. But if I'm looking back, and I'm not talking about the time when it was happening, right? I'm going back to Ayodhya, 18 years after the demolition of the Babri Masjid. So at that point, my question then becomes, what was local participation? How are you and I implicated in these politics, right? So, while, sometimes in affection and sometimes in irritation, if I ask my mother, how do you make Vetta Koramba? And she'll say, oh, we make it like this. And in your father's family, they make it like this. In my mother's side, they made it like this. But, in Tirunelveli, it's done like this. But in Tanjavur, they do it. So I'm like, can you just tell me how we eat it? But I think that idea of borders, right? Of where is the boundary of what is familiar and what is other. I think is something that one grows up with in multiple ways. And I think with the rise of the right wing, I mean, we have to give them lots of credit for lots of films that all of us make because they compel us to ask many more questions. And I think that the politics around food have become much worse. And I made that film about, a dozen years ago. So I think there's a lot more to be said about that even today, and I would make that film very differently today. But I think that if you look at that, or you look at the death penalty, of who gets the death penalty, where is justice working and not working? So I think it's really looking at how does it affect us in our lives, right? What is politics in our lives, whether it's entertainment, whether it's a meal, whether it is this notion of Ayodhya, this ground zero, but the ground zero is affecting us wherever we live, right? So I think that connection, I don't know whether I'm being articulate, but I think that connection with our everyday life of these larger politics is something that is the only thing I think that binds my work. So in 92, when I was making my first film with Surajit Sarkar, at that point, we were looking at liberalization and what on earth is a liberalized economy? What is the free market? So you're looking at how does, let's take rice growing. In that sense, it was right, in that context, it was rice growing, rice selling, like from the point of view of the producers of rice. Is there something called a free market? What if I'm a Dalit, say, small land holding woman? What if I'm a politician? Are we in the market in the same location? So I think this is, so now this is retrospective wisdom, Usha, honestly. It's not something that I can say, but I think that this is also what my whole feminist activism has taught me, of locating that personal, of not just my personal, but what is that everydayness? What does the mundane, what does the everyday tell us, right? And how does that make us reflect on our lives and on what is happening around us? So somewhere in that domain, I would say. Curiously, this is linked to your second question, that this is not how this film began. This is how this film became. Possibly, I think, in part because I was working on it with a friend, Mary Woods, with whom, I really miss her because she has not been well enough to come to India since the screenings have begun, and it's the tragedy that surrounds this film that I've actually not been at a screening with her ever. So it's been a loss for both of us. But we started because we are friends. She's an architecture historian. I've had an interest on the politics of spaces. Like, how is it gendered? How is it casted? How is it communalized? It's something that I've been working on in another domain. At some point, I thought that would be a film. It never became one, but it became other things. And so we were talking about single screen cinemas and whatever, or picture palaces as they call them in America, and which is what she'd keep calling them. And, she somehow met Nazir of Liberty and Bittu and, people like that. So we were talking about the loss of these spaces and a lot of memories, and hers, mine, across totally different contexts. She grew up in South Carolina in America, conservative, white-dominated place. She comes from a white rich family, but very alienated in terms of the local politics, all that stuff. So we said, chalo, let's document these theaters. So literally it started as documentation, which is something I've never done in my life. But we said, chalo, let's interview the cinema owners. And I love the fact that you picked up on the passion, because the passion is almost the first generation. By the time you come to Nazir and Jal Tata, you see an exhaustion of this burden, right? Of this big property sitting on your heads. I'm maintaining it meticulously, but what does it mean in this day and age? So there's that strange conversion that's happening, but there's the madness of these people. I couldn't stop laughing in some of these interviews. You go take over a bar, a boxing ring, and turn it into a film. It's like nuts. But that was what I think it was about, and in some ways we have different passions around the cinema, and somewhere that carries. So we documented this, and we were getting small grants, document, research. And of course then, because this has started in Bombay, we started documenting in Bombay and then went to the next organic spot, which was Chennai, and saw a huge difference between the two, because Chennai has state-supported cinema. In a sense of cinema culture is state-supported. So the taxation system, what you can do with your theaters, all those are very different for a whole host of political reasons. But there was an upbeat kind of energy around theaters. Not that now, over time, things have changed. And I'm talking like a span of about 10, 12 years ago. So this film has been in my life for a period of about 10 years by the time we actually got it out. Uh, so it was this whole kind of shift. And then, actually, in a way, Bombay planted the seed when we went to the theaters around Parel, around Grant Road, and we saw the Bhojpuri cinemas. They were our lesson really in what's happening. Because we were talking a lot about, we were talking about how English cinemas used to come to Lucknow, how they used to be dubbed in Hindi in the old days, and all this stuff, but hadn't actually connected the dots. So when we went to theaters like Super and Palace and Albert and all of this, then you're suddenly seeing that a migratory population, the relationship between the city, the population, demographics, and how cinema moves, right? So you talk about it as a moving medium, but it's also a physically moving medium. And then you're just thinking, okay, how did Hindi movies go to the South? I mean, at that point, it was still open-ended for me. And then serendipitously, I went for a wedding in Calicut. Anyone who knows me well knows how much I love weddings and how eternally bored I get. So I was like, somebody was going into town, I was like, yeah, take me. And, ended up in Crown Cinema because she knew the family, and then started looking at how that family had mapped out the city as a business thing, but how it actually understood what that meant, right? And then you're looking at how Hindi cinema comes, and so on and so forth. I won't bore you with it as though you haven't seen the film. But I think so the film sort of started, in a way, unraveling far beyond the nostalgia and whatever of the single screens, which held it, which is at the core of it, but what does it then, how does it transform? And then somewhere along the way, I also realized that the relationship with that theater is not only of the owner. In a way, many of us are more passionate about their theater than they are about their theater, right? Because we have memories. We have a physical, tangible, almost a tactile sense of sitting somewhere. I still remember where I was sitting when I was watching some film. Yeah. Who was around me, what did it feel like? That sense of bodily memory, I realized that that's what we kept talking about. So it was also a thing that this space is not speaking to me until I start speaking to the people whose memories this space is made of. Yeah? Tons of old films. Films that were not necessarily big hits, but that became big hits, or that were just shown. So, at least in my earlier screenings through 2025, that was last year, right? I actually kept meeting people who said, "Oh, now I'm going with my father to see a film," or "Now I'm going with my friends." Where it's an experience. It's a very different day. So there is, I think, some rediscovery. I don't think it's going to go back to what it was, but I think that both things are happening. So, of course, the thing with people who grew up watching films in single screen cinemas, etc., I think that nostalgia element is much bigger. But I think responses to that change is also something that people are seeing.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Very nice film. And I agree with Usha, that, very, very large canvas. And it was quite interesting to see the trajectory that the film took from nostalgia to discomfort to questions that you raised. And I just remembering that when we were young and we used to watch films, there used to be a newsreel. Before the national anthem, started, we all had to watch the newsreel if you wanted to watch the film. And that, was already politicizing the cinema space and the viewing experience to such a great extent, which didn't find a mention in the film. So I just found that interesting. But the question that I really wanted to ask is, most documentaries have a narrative voice, a voiceover, which sort of gives a direction. So was this a political decision or a cinematic decision that there is no voiceover? It's all just people speaking of their personal experiences or about their professional space?
As Usha said, there are lots of tough choices to be made. And I think we documentary filmmakers have a little bit of baggage of this country being a little like, oh God, you mean you make those newsreel type things, which a lot of us have faced, at least in our early years. Now nobody says that because there are no newsreels. So for instance, I chose the Lakshmi Swami story around independence and, about that idea that You celebrate the making of a nation by giving children tickets to go see a theater, to see cinema, right? So it was like such a bizarre thing to happen at that point. So you're making choices, and that was one choice. Your question was, sorry, what was your question? The narrative voice. I don't know whether you noticed there's a bunch of characters who you meet, who you get to know, who have names everybody has, but a lot of them are faces who you get to know a little bit more about. And there are many who are just voices, right, including mine. It's both a cinematic and a political decision, to answer your question, because I felt like I wanted to, and right from when I started shooting this one, so-called documenting, I started doing blind interviews. I was like, no camera, just, your camera, recording through, but I don't even want us to record the person's face. So we actually had the lens cap on, because my sense was I wanted to start you know how in a theater you hear a comment from the back? When you go to the loo, you hear somebody else, then when you're walking down to the parking lot, when you go out for a cigarette break, that anonymous voice actually has for me, those are the characters. And I felt that between the ones I am formally interviewing and the ones I'm almost overhearing, so literally they were stories collected from various people and places. I felt like, and the blind interviews, I wanted to just weave that story in. I didn't actually feel like I had something to tell that was bigger. So actually I put the same restriction on myself, and it slayed me. That was the hardest choice to make, to have to only allow myself one story. Because every anonymous voice or non-face voice only got one story. You never meet them again. You know, it's that person. So I had to be that, I had to set that on myself, and I still have second thoughts about which one I should have chosen. But yeah, that's sort of the answer. Yes.
Hi, my name is Vani Subramani. I loved your film, and I love movies, so I just want to talk a little about this. You've mentioned Dhurandhar twice. I watched Dhurandhar, and I watched Ikkis. Now, all the critics loved Ikkis. Most of the critics hated Dhurandhar. Ikkis is a big flop. Dhurandhar is a phenomenon. I just want to understand, what is the role that the critics play in this whole situation, and how do you look at this sort of, this disconnect between what critics like and what works at the box office? How do you feel about critics, and what is exactly their role in this industry and in framing the way we think about our country as well as films? I don't know if it's related to your film.
Actually, it's not my turf at all. I'm a documentary filmmaker. Nobody bothers to criticize us either.
But
so we are like
when you say
completely out of the turf, right?
Just one question. When you say Dhurandhar phenomenon, how would you, can you just expand on that?
Honestly, it took me making this film to watch Kashmir Files. Because I could not even make it through the Dhurandhar trailer. I'll be very honest with you. Okay, no, that's a separate point, and I'm not contributing my 1 rupee to them. I will watch it now it's come on whatever, I will watch it when I have the mental energy and honestly to watch it. That's why I said I've not actually put the rational side of my brain to analyzing that, whatever it is. I've not seen Ikkis either, because I intend to do that in relation to each other at some point when I have the capacity to cope with it. Because I feel that we are now in this turf of, I don't want to get into this critics versus market. I think that I actually feel people only complain about it when the critics say something that doesn't work for them. So I am not interested in that entire, there's no binary actually. The critics are a set of people, the market is a set of people, and they both have their place. I would be loath to say, it's de-intellectualizing to say nobody can actually analyze a film by their measure. So I feel like there's no need for us to actually pit those two things against each other. To be very honest, to seriously answer your question, I feel like there is a fact that films like Dhurandhar are in many ways much more dangerous than a Kashmir Files, which actually was also not so stupidly made. I happen to feel like it's an intelligent film, because it wove together it collapsed history in a very nefarious way, and wove a certain kind of history, a certain kind of narrative, which was very hard-hitting. Of course, things that happened across decade and a half happened in 1 week to one family. It changes the entire way you see that, right? And the way you feel it and all of this stuff. And there's lots of dangerous things happening there, but I'm saying a Dhurandhar which is smartly made. I have very progressive friends who will tell me, no, but it's really well made. I'm like, yep. And that is maybe something for us to worry about some more, you know? So I think we've all know the phenomenon of well-made propaganda films, and I think we need to worry a bit and be a little more, in that sense, we are not smart enough about decoding. So there is a loss of innocence about the medium, you know, to relate it with your question. But we're not such savvy readers that we don't see the politics. So I've been told many times, Ari, you're just overreacting, go see it. It's so nicely made, you know, it tells you, it's not strident. You know, the fact that you think that that is not strident, I mean, for me, that one shot was enough to kill me in the trailer. I'm like, I cannot watch this. You know, so I feel like it's something that we have to understand as part of a much larger politics and that is going on right now. I don't think it's about 20 critics versus a market. The torture scene.
Hi, Vani. Great to see you
Yes,
after
I know.
years. And it is phenomenal to see this film. I loved how, like, there is, you know, something for everybody in the film. You can enter it.
Bollywood masala.
Yeah, like, you know, masala, you can have, like, there's entertainment, there is, like, history of film, there is, like, you know, you're talking about the space itself, you're talking about the history of, like, you know, single theaters. And so my question, I don't know if it is a question, but it is something that I'm thinking, that how do you build that narrative where you're bringing in all of these lenses, where you have like Shohini talking about the films, and then you have like, you know, these theater owners saying their story, and how do you make that one, you know, it doesn't feel disconnected at any point, and it takes you on that emotional, you know, journey, which I loved about it. So if you could talk a little bit about, like, you know, how you got all of this together and made this. So, so yeah.
6 months of trauma, you want to go through it with me? No, I think the challenges are many actually. You know, so for instance, I want to draw a point to something we were discussing earlier about archives and archival content. Okay, so for instance, a theater like Liberty has old photographs. A rich family like Nazir's has a whole load of albums and stories and histories. And then there's someone like Javeer who comes from a very modest family in Bhadohi, who's come to, you know, works in a bakery as the, you know, as the, whatever, the money guy. You know, so how do you create some sort of balance in those characters, right? So, you know, we traveled to Bhadohi. I didn't know what I was and wasn't going to get, but then discovered this whole treasure of this family that's insane about photos, right? And then you're able to start building. So I think that it's about trying to find the relationships, not just in terms of archives, but trying to find the relationships between the people who you have met. I think they start then talking to each other in content. You know, when you're sitting and discussing it as a, you know, as a team, I mean, in this sense, it was really Niharika and me, and saying, okay, this one is saying this, but, you know, but that one is coming to it from this other position. So how does it link, right? I think the part where you're talking about it was lovely to watch and easy, you know, in that sense, I have to say, you know, so at one level, it's a really hard film to make. But at another level, it is an easy film to make because you have this whole body of films from your memory and your, I mean, it's, in one of the screenings, we were discussing whether if it had the same edit, but a different filmmaker of a different age, what would have those film inserts been, right? This is very much my generation, my exposure, primarily Hindi films, because that's, if I know anything at all, it's Hindi films. I don't know other cinema, right? So you're working, in that sense, it's easy. So we had to actually take out the easy, because initially it had much more. And you're like, no, toss. We don't need this clip. You toss. So, because the reason I wanted the clips, and I've also had a debate with a friend who believes that this film should not have had clips. Okay? But my point was, I wanted us as an audience watching this film to always remember why we went to the theaters. Yeah. I didn't want it to be only an intellectual memory. So, you're using trailers, you're using opening sequences, you're trying to you're also tactically embedding into the film uh, a song, but also the credits of who all it goes into making that long Bawarchi credit sequence. I mean, Shoini just laid the turf there. Because I was trying to think, how do I bring in all the various people? The stars are easy, the music directors. And even in that, Kishore Kumar is like the last credit, right? He's the bacha on the scene in 1972 for Rishikesh Mukherjee. So just trying to see what are the various components of films that you bring in and sort of start embedding and playing with. So it was tough choices, but also I think the real thing is the relationships between your characters. And how do you place them, juxtapose them so you create some parity between them? Because you're working across people who could sit in a box office, in the box, and who will struggle to pay for a front row, right? And how do you create that, some sense of, I hope I managed to do it, some sense of giving them an equal platform to speak.
I just wanted to say that you're also linking the characters with cinematic characters. Like,
Yeah.
for instance, he talks about coming to Bombay and you see Mukaddar ka Sikandar.
Irresistible.
Yeah. it is just-
Irresistible.
yeah,
Because
so-
Javeed loves biking around Bombay. How was I not going to do it?
So it has these really, it has these very cinematic kind of moments, which are quite delightful. And also just the question, you might have been asked this. The title comes at 11 minutes.
Yep.
I was just curious about that.
That is, I took a leap of faith with Niharika. She was like, what does it matter? And I thought to myself, true, what does it matter, actually? And then we happened to watch something else where the title came at the 17th minute. I'm like, we did it at 11. No, actually, because she started building this opening of, just the passion for cinema, first starting from Nazir's point of view of the theater. So basically one of the things was, and it was actually Anupama Chandra who pointed this out, we'd been talking earlier, and she said, when she looked at, when I was talking to her about the film, and she said, so basically you're in the theater, right? You have to come up for air in parts, but keep us in that theater, because you already have a lot to tell. Because there's lots of people's personal stories, lots of distractions in my head, which is why I was saying that I gave it to Niharika to say, this is what we want to do, we want to stay in the theater, but how do you also build some solidity with the characters without going off into their personal lives and all of this stuff? So, sorry, what was your question as usual?
I just said it was just interesting that the title came
Huh. So the thing was that she started building this, and then we got a little fearless about, no, but we should. And then it felt like a nice way to open. And I was like, so is this, are we going to do the title in the beginning? She said, nah, we'll just put it here. She was just confident about it. And then it felt right. And then I was like, yeah, sure. Then it became a non-issue. But initially, but the issue that became crazy was that the last new character comes in at the 57th minute of a 63-minute film. The guy who talks about watching DDLJ. Right? That is something I got a lot of comments from all my crew, from my sound team, my mastering team, my coloring team. Even Niharika was like, are you sure you want to bring in some? I'm like, yeah, they're still talking. They're still in the theater. So we'll go.
Last question.
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for the film. I was wondering if there were any opportunities to interview the staff of these spaces and how, because my observation is also that there are various generations of people working, there are young boys and there are also the projectionists who are in their middle-aged projectionists, and also there are security guards who are in 30s and 40s. So right now, they sort of place the space itself in the present, in the today's scenario. So I was just wondering, I'm not saying that it's a different film.
You can say it also, that's perfectly fine.
So,
And because in a way the space is incompletely defined without them, I agree with you. But it's a boundary I chose to set, because in the initial period we actually did, because it's not just a matter of a projectionist. Then you're talking 70 mm, 35 mm down to digital, right? So there are levels of stories to be told there. And I just felt that this I cannot do. Because I did the interviews, and then I also have with Bhojpuri producers, because now Bhojpuri cinema is actually being made in Bombay, just in case we think otherwise, So in Film City, where everything else is being made. So it's all a bit, there is a lot of it's like a centipede or something in 3 dimension and 360 degrees and whatever. So it's actually very, very complicated. So I just decided that, okay, I did the interviews and I felt like, am I going to be able to see this through, right? Because then if I do this, then I need to do this across all my locations and do this with genuineness, right? With integrity. And then be able to tell those stories. I mean, like the not just the security guard, the person who guides you to your seat, the usher. The usher must have 1,000,000 stories, yeah? But I just felt, okay, this I'm not going to be able to do. And if you see very soon after the owners and the whatever, and we move out into the others, and I felt like, let me just try and do this much, But I do agree with you that there are many stories there which would tell us a lot more about the people who come to watch the films, I think there is lots to be said there, and maybe a more critical commentary of the classes of people who now, it would be great to do it in a multiplex. Because that's where the class disparity is so in your face. So it would be fabulous to approach the multiplex from the point of view of people who work in it. But good luck trying to get them to speak, and because they'll never get another job, So anyway, those are all handleables. But yeah, but well observed and pointed out. Thanks.
I just want to say a last thing, that I really like the way you ended the film, where it suggests that this film is about film. And, the voice of Anand, So you don't know if it is joy in Anand, that he'll never die, or cinema will never die. I quite really like that very wonderful moment.
Thank you.
So thank you for a lovely film, and thank you for coming.
And thanks to all of you for this lovely conversation.